Hey everyone, welcome to the video. Today we are going to be checking out the best champions in League right now for solo queue if all you care about is climbing. We'll go role by role, and you guys seem to like the last version that I did with the top tier. So basically we have like 8 top tier champions, and then we're going to pick half of those and go into a bit more detail with guides and builds and stuff. There'll be timestamps, there'll be a list of champions in the description as well if you want to read, but let's jump into our first role, which is going to be AD carries. Our top tier looks pretty similar to last time, except we have a few new ones. So Lucian and Ashe are now going to be in the top tier for me this patch. We have Jinx, Xayah, Jhin, Sivir, and Caitlyn as well. The first one we're going to look at today, I think, is probably the best overall, and that is going to be Xayah. She can get extremely fed, even very early into the game with a passive and with the help of her support and kind of like chaining the two together. A lot of supports do have crowd control, so they add Xayah's passive, and as long as you hit your W, you're pretty much guaranteed to do it, which is pretty much a guaranteed kill in lane. A lot of AD carries can do that, but Xayah is different because she scales into a beast. She's very good 1v1 because of her missiles, like locking onto one target, very high damage, and very safe as well with her ultimate to cut around, the big shield, and her stealth. Especially with the AP build, you have more defensive options like a Zhonya's or like a Banshee's as well, which helps you survive, but you become sort of like an assassin, so you can hunt people down, lock on with the missiles like we talked about, find them, and kind of snowball that way. That is very different to pretty much every other one we have at the moment, but I think the second best and probably the best for low ranks is definitely going to be Jinx. The difference here is that she's very good early game. She spikes hard with just Infinity Edge and the bonus rocket crit damage, and it starts to become AoE after that obviously as well, but you really start to chunk. You also nuke towers if you're left alone, and people base at really bad times, especially at low ranks, but if you get a kill as well, like it's definitely a few plates or maybe the entire thing afterwards. It's very easy to turn a small lead into a bigger one with like the tower taking or the passive resets, and she is easier to play the most, higher damage earlier into the game the most as well, and ultimately you right click, you crit, and you win. Xayah is pretty similar to that. Not Xayah, feather lady. I know I say it very similarly, but she doesn't always have the best early, but she scales amazingly well with a W and the extra damage, which obviously does more when you have loads of crit. Rakan is also better right now, and this is part of it that we have to kind of mention because when you pair them together, their lane phase becomes so deadly, and they have way more damage than you expect with the W synergy. She is also very safe though, and this is why I think she's actually so good in the meta at the moment. She can peel for herself, root people, she has her ultimate to dodge whatever you want, and if she gets ahead, she's very high damage but very difficult to shut down because of that. So last up I want to mention Lucian because there is a new build that we're going to look at very soon in a video, I think, because I've been playing it a bunch myself, but it is full crit now. It spikes harder at 2 items. There's no more Blade the Ruined King, but Essence Reaver and Infinity Edge as your first 2, basically lots of AD, and it makes your abilities and passive shots really hurt. It makes his mid game stronger, whereas lane phase is already very good, so he can get ahead, but then he runs over people with the damage afterwards from these 2 items. It's very hard to lock him down in team fights and actually shut that down as well. Moving into our mid lane, we have a few new ones here. So Sylas, Syndra, and Kassadin are all going to be entering into our top tier, along with Ahri, Zed, Akali, Fizz, and Yasuo. We're going to start with Akali. She is the pretty much monster of the mid lane in 9.16, pretty much. She can snowball out of control and delete anybody that she wants to once she gets a few items. Even though her stealth is worse, it's not the same. She still has that to survive after diving in, but there's a very high skill cap, and there are a lot of ways to kind of outplay on Akali. The more you play her, the better you are, the more damage you seem to like kind of out of her kit, if that makes sense, and pull out of it. So it's not one that you can pick up like a Malzahar and instantly win. It's one that becomes very scary on a half decent player or with a few early kills. Like either or really. If you get fed, you don't have to be that good. We never normally talk about Yasuo, so I guess we should kind of talk about him once in a while. It's a similar deal. He scales very hard with the player. This is why I don't normally recommend him for solo queue, because if you're bad with him, you really won't get anywhere at all. With enough items though, any idiot can play this and just right click, press Q, press R with some setup from his team. The skill comes in winning the lane phase, outplaying people, juking around, using your E properly, and setting up your own damage. Especially with 2+ items, he becomes really strong. He gets a bit tankier, he has very high damage, and I think he can be very hard to deal with, especially at lower ranks. There's actually a lot of Sylas coming back as well in 9.16. And by the way, he was hit very hard in the jungle again this patch, so I would not recommend playing him as a jungler at all. In kind of more like brawler matchups, fights that last a while, he's really good, whereas healing can kick in a bit more, and he's still very strong early game. I'm going to show you Electrocute in the build here, since that's what most people use, but Conqueror is actually making a bit more of a comeback as well, prolonging those fights and just using the healing to kind of come out on top. Our last one for mid lane, and our honorable mention, Syndra was buffed again this patch, and actually has people playing her now. She's got a boost to her Q bonus damage when maxed out and more damage on her E. I think she's still very dependent early, since she needs to be ahead to be able to do a job and nuke people, and that's really the only reason that you're going to play Syndra in the first place. As far as the control mage goes though, she's very solid. She's also good versus lanes that she can bully from range like Akali and Sylas, who are actually really strong and very popular. Next up, we're going to check in with our junglers. So there are a couple of new ones here. I really want to talk about Nunu at some point today and Karthus as well. But we have stuff like Jarvan, Elise, Kha'zix, Hecarim, Kayn, and Vi as well. Kha'zix and Jarvan are the two best junglers at the moment for solo queue, in my opinion. They're very opposites with the early versus late game, Jarvan being early and Kha'zix late game. Kha'zix ideally wants 3 items, and once he has them, that is when he can run around and one-shot everybody very easily with his stealth on top of it. I think he's probably one of the best carry junglers out there right now. We have a lot of others that have been nerfed, and we have others that are good as well, like Kayn and Evelynn, for example, but he's just the easiest to pull off and one of the highest damage as well. Elise is for sure the best early game jungler that we have at the moment, but she does fall off harder, so we're going to go to her next. She ganks very well and nukes everybody for a good portion of the game. Landing a cocoon for like half of the game will mean that she can one-shot most people until like 3-4 items into it, and that makes her fearless running into lanes or the jungle. She doesn't really have to worry about it. If you do play her, you kind of need a plan because you're ultimately not going to be able to carry like in huge team fights and stuff, but the main thing that really separates like an okay and a good Elise is diving. Normally you find a lane pushing, you go round the back of their tower so they can't escape, you dive in, you burst them, you repel afterwards, and you drop the aggro, and it's such a clean and easy way to shut down a laner. I did say I want to talk about Nunu. He's a bit different, but statistically, he is the best to climb with and has been for a little while. He's so strong, he ganks well and carries by never dying. He takes almost the most damage on average every game. He heals the most as well, gets a ton of assists for more items, but he just buys so much time for his team in a fight. If you pick any lane with some crowd control, if you let them use it like setup and then you run in with your snowball, most of the time that is going to be a kill, especially with no flash. So you keep going back to the same lane, you set up a 10 and you just camp them. Our honorable mention might seem a little bit weird, but just to mention Karthus here, especially at high ranks and in career, he's an absolutely insane jungler again. He can clear through the jungle so quickly, which gives him more gold, but more time to gank as well, which actually aren't too bad with his wall, with the slow from that and the skittles. At least on average, he is the highest damage jungler we have in the game at the moment. Once you stack up your Dark Harvest and you get a few items, you can press R and there isn't much anybody can do, and your Q does so much if you can actually hit it. Top lane is next up for us, and in our top tier we have a couple of new ones, so Fiora, Jax, and Pantheon, and then some of the others like Aatrox, Darius, Renekton, Riven, and Akali. We're starting with Aatrox again because his 2-item power spike is just too good not to include him right now at the top. At that point, he does a stupid amount of damage and he's very hard to kill. He has a ton of healing from items and his kit, lots of mobility and AoE damage for team fights. Plus, I just honestly think the move speed on his ultimate is so much more useful now. I think he's one of the hardest top laners to play against and to shut down. Like one flash mega Q could be enough to turn a fight and kill a few people or chunk them very hard. And he's very scary when like just going even, but he's proper scary when he's ahead. Fiora was also buffed this patch and made a decent bit better in the lane phase. At least the cooldown of her E is lower now to start with, and the bonus attack speed also scales up to 90% from a 50% cap before. Fiora is always scaled so well with items, she just kind of struggled to get them in the first place, but later she is a powerhouse in team fights or split pushing, and that is really why you pick her over another champion. That also means if her lane phase is a bit better, she should survive a bit more. She also stands more chance to win lanes sometimes, and then with a lead, it's very hard to shut her down again and play against her because she has the healing and the damage. It's sort of the same with Jax as well. He was buffed to lower his Q leap cooldown by 2 seconds rank 1, which is lane phase. It isn't massive, but it probably was just about enough. In theory, it means that he can escape a little bit easier, pick fights more often and stuff like that, and not get bent over as hard in the lane phase. I don't think anybody needs a reminder, but Jax at 2 items with Spear is probably the most disgusting thing in the game, and it looks like this patch he reaches that point more often, and that is why he is better. Let's quickly mention the new Pantheon rework as well. So far he's played a bunch. His win rate is climbing every day as a top laner, so he doesn't seem that bad at all for an update. Going Bruiser seems to be the way forward, honestly. Items like Death Stance, Sterix, Spear of Shojin, they're all doing much better than full lethality. So you start with lethality and then you move into this. It makes him more of a threat mid-game. You're pretty tanky, you've got some good health there, good healing, still good damage though, and when you max out your E second, the damage is actually insane. It's 150% of your AD, plus you survive for ages. Last up, we have our support. So we have a couple back into the meta like Lux and Morgana, and then we have Thresh, Pyke, Janna, Rakan, Nautilus, and Nami. Now, Thresh is still amazing, as always is as well, so we're going to skip him today. And Lux has made a big comeback after this patch, getting her shield buff once it's maxed out. 40 or 80 more if it hits twice. You can still max your E first, then Q, then W like normal, play for a bit of damage, bit of utility, and do this really good mix of like support and damage, and that's probably better at lower ranks. But the other way is to max your W first and rush a Sensor and Athenes. It seems to be the cheesy way to protect your team from a lot of damage as you go into mid game, but I would definitely give it a try. It seems actually very strong with this buff. Moving on to Pyke, on most stat sites at the moment, he has roughly a 65% win rate before 15 minutes into the game, and I think that's the highest out of any support. Obviously, that starts with him being a kill lane. That's why you pick him, right? One hook, the stun, and you're probably going to get a kill, but you can roam around afterwards and pretty much do the same thing. Why it's so much higher now, though, at the start of the game is the ultimate change, giving him more gold. Basically, it's way more gold, it's way more items with kills than before, which makes it even harder to come back if you mess up against him early. Janna is one of the few mages outside of Lux who can fight with the big boys. She brings some decent damage when you max your W and then stops everyone dying mid-game. The change that lets you reduce your shield cooldown just seems so strong when you hit that 1 to 2 item point. You start to group and you have your first few big fights where your shield really does actually have a big impact. Interestingly though, when I looked a bit more into this, you can punish her in lane higher up, but at lower ranks you can't really. She is a monster in the lane phase, one of the best early game supports actually, because she posts constantly and people find it very hard to stop her. So there's a bit of a difference between high elo Janna and lower ranks. I do want to mention Nautilus as our last honorable mention, and he's basically a budget Pyke, but trades damage for crowd control. There are still a lot of decent matchups in the meta at the moment into most things, like except Volibear actually, which we don't really play a lot, but Korea does a ton. Even just one hook with Nor is deadly, right? With the follow-up afterwards, especially after 6 when you can lead with that instead, and it makes it so easy. He isn't the best for team fights outside of the crowd control, so once you blow your load, it's pretty much done, I guess, but you can roll through a lane with a more aggressive AD and not let anybody recover. So those are going to be the best champions for me in the game right now for solo queue, at least in 9.16. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Let me know any other picks that you're playing right now in the comment section down below. But thank you for watching until the very end. And for now, I will leave you with the robots.